Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today we'll be discussing about temperature regulation and hypothermia in a newborn. Now first of all, let's understand what you mean by hypothermia. Hypo means low and thermia means temperature, right? So whenever there's a low body temperature, I'd call it hypothermia. And when do you call it hypothermia in a newborn? Because that is our topic of discussion. So in a newborn, we would call it hypothermia whenever the axillary body temperature goes below 36.5 degrees Celsius. Okay, so why less than 36.5? Because the normal temperature in them is in the range of 36.5 to 37.5 degrees Celsius. So whenever it goes below it, I'd call it hypothermia. Now, why are we so much concerned about hypothermia? It is because the infants or the neonates are more prone to hypothermia. Why are they more prone to hypothermia? Would be number one, because as you would have noticed in a newborn that the surface area of the body is much more compared to their weight, right? That is much more compared to the weight, so naturally there'd be more heat loss. Number two point would be that the skin is very thin in them, and if the skin is very thin, it won't be able to prevent the loss of the heat. And the third point would be that the subcutaneous fat in these babies is also low, and we know that fat generates heat. So if that is low, naturally the baby is more prone to lose heat from the body and generate hypothermia, right? So that was why they are more prone to hypothermia. And now we would understand that how does a baby respond to hypothermia. The most important mechanism would be what is known as a non-shivering thermogenesis, right? This is very important. This is the main mechanisms by which babies generate heat in their body, right? That is non-shivering thermogenesis. But before understanding non-shivering thermogenesis, I would like to brief you about brown fat. Now you must be knowing that there are two types of fat in our body, that is brown and white, and there are two peculiarities about brown fat. Number one point is that it has a lot of mitochondria in it, and the second point is that the brown fat is present in a lot of amount in the neonates, right? So where would you find it? You'd find it in the axilla, or in the groin region, or the nape of the neck. So these are the various areas which have a lot of brown fat in these neonates. And now let's understand, whenever a newborn is exposed to cold, it will have a sympathetic surge in its body, right? Sympathetic nervous system would be activated, and this sympathetic nervous system would release a molecule which is norepinephrine, which is extremely important to note. This norepinephrine will go and act on its receptor. And where is its receptor located? This purple color thing that you can see is basically a cell. What cell is it? It is a brown fat cell, brown adipose tissue. Okay, so this brown adipose tissue has a beta adrenergic receptor, as you can see, the one that I'm highlighting. So this norepinephrine would come in and bind to its receptor, and then it will activate a secondary messenger pathway, which is through G protein, that will act on adenylate cyclase, and this adenylate cyclase would in turn generate CAMP molecules. These CAMP would act on protein kinase A, and protein kinase A would activate the hormone sensitive lipase. Hormone sensitive lipase would break down the triglycerides into fatty acids, and these fatty acids would enter into what? They would enter into mitochondria. Like I mentioned earlier, the brown fat has a lot of mitochondria in it. So the gray colored cell that you can see right now is a mitochondria, and these finger-like projections which they have drawn in the white and the yellow color, this is the matrix of the mitochondria, right? So fatty acids enter in, and mitochondria contains the electron transport chain. So via the electron transport chain, first of all, the protons are transferred out of the matrix into the cytosol, and when a proton gradient is set up, the H plus ions have to enter back into the matrix, right? They have to enter back into the matrix. Now an extremely important point is what is coming up, is that it has got two routes to enter back into the matrix, which could be, number one route would be via the ATP synthase molecule it can enter back, or second is by uncoupling it would enter back, right? So these are the two mechanisms. And what would it generate via ATP synthase? Via ATP synthase, if it enters back into the matrix, it would be generating ATP naturally. And if it enters via the uncoupling mechanism, it would be generating what? It would be generating heat, right? This is important to note. So in a brown fat, it would be preferring the uncoupling mechanism. Why? Because the ATP synthase activity is low in brown fat. So it would be entering by the uncoupling mechanism into the matrix and would generate a lot of heat. So this is the mechanism of a non-shivering thermogenesis that you need to understand, which takes place in a newborn. So this was one of the mechanisms. Now let us try to see all of the mechanisms in one place, and let's see that what is the problem with hypothermia. So let's try to understand in the form of a flowchart. If the baby is exposed to cold, like I told you, what would it do? It would activate the sympathetic nervous system, and sympathetic nervous system would be releasing norepinephrine. What would norepinephrine do? It would be doing the uncoupling reaction of the fatty acids, and fatty acids would then uncouple and produce a lot of free fatty acids, right? The fat would be producing a lot of free fatty acids, and these free fatty acids, what they would do is that you must be knowing that bilirubin is bound to albumin. These free fatty acids would break the bond between bilirubin and albumin, and it will itself bind to albumin. So what is left? Bilirubin is left alone. So the bilirubin levels would rise in the blood and result in what? Would result in hyperbilirubinemia. So do you see that hyperbilirubinemia is one of the problems that could occur if the baby is not able to cope up with the cold that it is facing? So hyperbilirubinemia would be one of the things that it would face. Another thing that it could face is that sympathetic nervous system would increase the metabolic rate, right? It would increase the metabolic rate. So two things would happen. Number one would be that the cells would require a lot of glucose to survive, right? So if it requires a lot of glucose, what would occur? Hypoglycemia, right? It requires, because hypoglycemia is occurring, it requires a lot of glucose, right? And this is also the reason why glycolysis would occur. Second thing would be that because of the increase in the metabolic rate, the oxygen requirement of the body is increased, right? The oxygen requirement is increased by the body. And the third thing would be sympathetic nervous system, as you must be knowing, does a vasoconstriction both peripherally as well as pulmonary, right? Vasoconstriction of periphery as well as pulmonary. So if a pulmonary vasoconstriction occurs, what would happen? There'd be pulmonary hypertension in result, right? So pulmonary vasoconstriction would result in pulmonary hypertension, right? Which would do what? Again, it would increase the oxygen requirement. Now, if the oxygen requirement is increased and the body is unable to meet it, the body would go into a state of hypoxia. And due to hypoxia, it would try to get oxygen by one of the either way. And since oxygen is not available, so it would enter into what kind of mechanism? It would enter into anaerobic metabolism. Anaerobic metabolism, which means in the absence of oxygen. And anaerobic metabolism would generate what? It would generate lactic acid. Lactic acid would lead to what? It would lead to metabolic acidosis in the body, right? So these are the various problems that would occur at the end all of these would affect all the, I would say, organs which are present in the body. So can you see that if hypothermia at all occurs, there might be hyperbilirubinemia, there might be hypoglycemia, there can be hypoxia, there be metabolic acidosis, there can be pulmonary hypertension. So there are a lot of organs, and hypoxia in general would affect all the organs of the body, right? All the organs would be affected. So this is why hypothermia is very dangerous, and we need to be very careful about hypothermia. Okay, so now we move on to the prevention and the treatment aspect of hypothermia. And how we could do that is by keeping the delivery room temperature at least 25 degrees Celsius. Then, as soon as the baby is born, we have to dry the baby, we have to wipe out the secretions, and we have to cover the baby from head to toe in order to prevent the heat losses, right? Cover the baby properly. Then, frequent breastfeedings will also prevent the heat loss, right? So frequent breastfeeding has to be there. And the fifth point would be rooming in, which is keeping the mother and the baby on the same bed, right? So rooming in will also prevent it. Now if suppose there is moderate or severe hypothermia and you have to deal with it, then what would you do is this is kangaroo mother care. So kangaroo mother care, as you can see the position of the baby, it is placed in skin to skin contact with the mother. So this will also prevent the heat losses, and it's done in low birth weight babies. Then this is the radiant warmer. As you can see, in the radiant warmer the baby is placed on this area or this tray, and the mechanism of heat transfer is by radiation. And another mechanism could be incubator of by which we can rewarm the baby. So these are the various mechanisms that you can use to prevent and to treat hypothermia. And so that was all about the temperature regulation mechanisms and hypothermia. If you did like my video, do like, share and subscribe, and let me know in the comment section how you like it and what is the next topic that you would want to learn. Thank you so much for watching.